Now, as the Russia-Ukraine war grinds on, Russian President Vladimir Putin calls it a righteous battle and orders conscription, while Ukraine proposes a joint air defense shield amid intensifying drone strikes, shifting front lines and diplomacy. So, as the war between Russia and Ukraine enters another grim milestone, what was once a shock to the world has settled into a brutal rhythm, a war of endurance. Tonight, on this anniversary, we pause not just to take stock, but to trace how tactics have shifted, alliances have strained or strengthened, and whether peace, however distant, still flickers on the horizon.
More than 3 years into the war, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is now defined by grinding attrition, relentless air and drone warfare, and high-stakes diplomacy. Front lines continue to shift, but progress is measured in kilometers, not breakthroughs. The fall of Volodar last year symbolized the brutal nature of positional fighting. Russia's summer campaign then pushed deeper into Donetsk, seizing ground near Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. The strategy favors steady gains that bleed Ukrainian resources rather than rapid advances. Ukraine attempted change momentum with a cross-border incursion into Russia's Kursk region, but the operation proved costly, and reports of North Korean military engineers in the area underscored Moscow's ability to pull in outside support. Above the trenches, the air war is escalating. Russia has launched its largest barrages of drones and missiles to date, straining Ukrainian air defenses. In response, Kiev has expanded its deep strikes, hitting oil refineries and infrastructure inside Russia to raise the economic cost of war. Diplomatic maneuvering adds another layer. President Zelensky has met President Trump twice this year, including at the Vatican and in Washington, pressing for security guarantees and future aid. Trump, casting himself as a mediator, has hinted at talks with President Putin.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop.
Remarks that stirred unease in Kiev and across Europe. What lies ahead is uncertain. Russia continues its incremental gains. Ukraine escalates long-range strikes, and diplomacy is caught between battlefield realities and global divisions. For now, the war remains a contest of endurance, technology, and political will.
Now, to help us take stock as to where we are in this conflict, we are joined from Moscow by former advisor to President Vladimir Putin, Sergei Markov. And from Kyiv, we're joined by the former Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister, Alexei Melnik. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here on Q News. I'll start with you, Mr. Markov. So Russia declared this special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine. Yet after several years of war, Ukraine has more Western weapons coming in. It has, in some cases, a larger army, stronger NATO ties than ever. That can't have been the plan from the beginning.
Of course, this is not a successful implementation of the plan. It's clear that special military operation, in fact, transfer to the real big war. For Russians, it's civil war because Ukraine was part of Russia during 1,000 years, and Kyiv was Russian capital during 3 centuries. Yes, and so it was not success. We regard that Ukraine is no Ukrainian-Russian war. We regard that Ukraine is not independent country. It's new colony of the Western coalition, and this is war of the huge NATO coalition against Russia by using the Ukrainian proxy army. And we know that NATO is very big and very influential military and political alliance. And this is not direct war of NATO, but it's some kind of hybrid proxy war of NATO against Russia. It's aggression of NATO against Russia by using the Ukrainian proxy army and Ukrainian neo-colonial regime. And how it will continue, we don't know. In the moment when Russia will give really strong response to this NATO aggression against Russia, probably the war will be stopped. But now still NATO has plans and ideas to crash Russia by using the Ukrainian proxy.
Okay, we're going to come to the idea of it being a proxy war in just a little while. Mr. Melnik, though, Ukraine's counteroffensive back in 2023 failed. You've been facing shortages in Ukraine of artillery shells. Air defense is not as good as it could be. So, and also you had the problem with US aid delayed for months. Is Ukraine trying to fight this war with one hand tied behind its back?
Good evening. First of all, congratulations with the anniversary, and let me say that I'm always honored to be invited for your programs. Coming back to your question, yes, of course, Ukraine has many problems, and you rightly mentioned that the counteroffensive operation back in 2023 failed due to many factors, and one of them was a lack of weaponry, lack of artillery shells. But at the end of the day, I think Ukraine, after the more than years of war, is not losing. It's not winning, but it's not losing, and it doesn't allow Russia to achieve its goals. As you rightly mentioned in your introduction, Putin openly stated these goals, which was demilitarization of Ukraine, which was prevention of eastward NATO expansion, and something very strange regarding denazification, about Nazis that do not exist in Ukraine. But what Putin achieved at the end of the day, as for the moment, Ukraine has probably the second strongest army in Europe. And NATO has expanded by inviting Sweden and Finland. And when Mr. Markov blames or says that this is the aggression of NATO, come on. NATO did not attack Russia. This is Russia attacked Ukraine, and Russia is performing hybrid operations, including drone attacks, air provocations, breaking cables on the Baltic Sea. And this is what we can call aggression or hybrid aggression of Russia against NATO. And Russia shouldn't blame NATO for being, supportive for Ukraine. This is what Russia has achieved by its actions.
Well, I will, thank you very much for that, Mr. Melnik. I will let you have your say, Mr. Markov, on NATO and that issue and the proxy war. But I just wanted to ask you, before we get to that point, despite controlling around 18%, I think, of Ukrainian territory, Russian forces have failed to fully capture some key cities, which were the aim in the first place. And now with Ukrainian drones striking deep inside Russia, including oil refineries and air bases as well, this must be a much more defensive war than it was to start with.
It was a defensive war from the beginning. You understand that for Russia, it's existential war. Because what we could see as Western plans, Ukraine, which was part of the Russia during 1,000 years it was part of the Russia, and dependent on because some historical circumstances last 30 years. And Western countries decided to prohibit Russian language, which is a language of the 70% or 80% of the Ukrainian population, because they are Russians. And they want to make anti-Russia from Ukraine. They want by methods of terror, and they want to make anti-Russians from Ukrainians. They want to create a relation between Russia and Ukraine, and between Palestinians and Israel, and between Pakistan and India. Russia does not like it. Russia has to stop it. Russia fighting for, first of all, not to having great enemy nearby. That's why Russia trying for the neutrality of Ukraine. Also, Russia fighting for the liberation of Ukrainian Russian people, with 80 or probably 75% of population, from the terroristic repressive regime. Can you imagine that, for example, in Egypt, Arabic language, the language of full majority, will be prohibited, and some another language will be called official. Exactly what happened in Ukraine. So for Russia, it was defensive war from the beginning. And if you take a specific military attack, offensive, defensive, it's things which is very closely interconnected.
Okay, well, let's put that directly then to Mr. Melnik. It was a defensive war, says Mr. Markov, from the beginning. Ukraine was a threat to Russia's sovereignty. What do you say about that?
I just simply have to understand what Mr. Markov is talking about. How Ukraine could present any military threat to Russia, the biggest nuclear power in the world, Russia, which has 5 times bigger population, 10 times bigger economy. Can you seriously talk about any military threat coming from Ukraine? And also I can do fact-checking about historical things, about number of or percentage of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, even Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. I speak Russian as well, fluent Russian, but I don't ask anyone to protect me. Similarly, we don't have this ethnical division in Ukraine. All of them are Ukrainian citizens. Ukraine have 40 different minorities. So just simply not relevant to
I think just to interrupt a second, I think Russia would say that attempts to join NATO and the European Union would be a threat as NATO is getting closer and closer to Russian land. Are Ukraine provoking Russia?
I think the biggest provocation for Russia is the weakness. If one side shows weakness, that this is the biggest provocation for Ukraine. By the way, this is a big question for NATO and for the European Union nowadays. And if let's imagine that Russia considered Ukrainian aspiration to join NATO as a threat. And then my question, why Russia doesn't consider Sweden and Finland joining NATO and do not launch another, as Mr. Markov said, defensive operation against Finland and Sweden? Because Ukraine only had aspiration to join NATO, and now Russia had additional 1,000-kilometer border with NATO countries. That's how I see.
Okay, and Mr. Markov, North Korea is now sending artillery shells and, to some reports, also troops as well. And Iran is supplying drones. Given Russia's military capabilities and its status in the world, how has Russia not yet resolved this war? Is that some perhaps an embarrassment?
Of course, it was not ideal, and there was a lot of criticism against Russia, why Russia had been not prepared enough for such modern war. But nobody was prepared for such a modern war, except Ukrainian regime. I want to stress that from our point of view, Ukraine does not exist as an independent country. Ukrainian regime is function from the Western coalition. It's Ukrainian regime use Ukrainian people as meat in the fighting against Russia for Western interests. And you can see that from Ukrainian streets, dozens of video every day during all these years when Ukrainian men have been captured by violence to send to the war. Ukrainian people doesn't want this war because they understand this is war not for Ukrainian interests, it's war for the interests of the supervisor of Ukraine, who is Western coalition. And Russia was not prepared enough for such big war. And also nobody was prepared for the drones war. And that we believe that it could be more special military operations and different combination of special military operation as Americans and British and others doing. But it appeared to be that a massive war, such as Iran-Iraq war or the war during Cold War but with drones. That's why Russian army needed cheap artillery shells, which they got from North Korea, and also Russian army needed cheap drones. And we like that Iran gives some technology of doing. But now 99% of the Russian drones which used by Russian army produced by Russian economy during at least last 2 years. And finally, I think that such war could be continued even 10 years. I wrote about this 2 years ago, and to my regret, there are nothing exists which for sure must stop this war during last year. So
okay, we haven't got a lot of time. So we haven't got a lot of time. So I just want to let Mr. Melnik answer that. Mr. Markov saying that Ukraine isn't a real country. You can answer that if you want. But also, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed, maybe more, since the beginning of the conflict. Population decline, war fatigue, of course, must be terrible in Ukraine. How is Kyiv going to maintain any kind of morale and manage to recruit?
Yes, this is a very important question. And according to our officials, Ukraine has lost already more than 30,000 soldiers, and also thousands of civilians due to Russian attacks. And demographic problem, of course, most of the European countries now have demographic problems, and this problem been exaggerated by the ongoing war, because about 9 million of Ukrainians are now refugees in the European countries and IDPs inside the country. So this huge problem, and I don't think that anyone in Ukraine has, in the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian society, has a definite answer how Ukraine is going to handle this problem. But this is an existential war for Ukraine. And when Mr. Markov talks about mobilization, forceful mobilization in Ukraine, it's not as massive as Russian propaganda shows. But of course, people, not every man or every woman in Ukraine want to join armed forces. At the same time, we have 1 million people in uniform, and most of them are volunteers who joined the armed forces or defense forces in Ukraine voluntarily. And they still keep the front line. Of course, they don't want war, but they don't have many choices.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's hope at some point very soon a resolution is found to this conflict. From Moscow, joining us, the former advisor to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Sergei Markov. Thank you very much indeed. And from Kyiv, former Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Alexei Melnik. Thank you both for joining us here on Q News. Now, no end in sight. The Russian-Ukrainian war continues to reshape Europe's security landscape, from shifting front lines to drone warfare and global diplomacy. We break down the key developments driving this high-stakes conflict.
With the Russia-Ukraine war grinding on, shifting front lines, evolving Russian tactics, and mounting geopolitical stakes continue to define the conflict. Russian forces have seized nearly 2,000 square kilometers since May. Most gains are in Donetsk, and southeastern cities remain fiercely contested. The pace has been steady. In May, almost 500 square kilometers were captured. Gains slowed in June and July before surging again in August, with another 500 square kilometers taken. Drones are driving these advances. Russia's Rubicon program has fielded fiber optic UAVs resistant to jamming, with ranges to up to 20 kilometers, targeting logistic hubs, supply routes, and Ukrainian command posts. Western Donetsk has grown porous, allowing Russian units to exploit gaps through infiltration and small unit tactics. But in Sumy and Kharkiv, denser defenses continue to slow Moscow's momentum. Western policy remains decisive. Washington leads sanctions, intelligence, and defense aid, while European allies debate sanctions, NATO enlargement, and security guarantees, keeping Ukraine firmly on the global agenda. Inside Russia, polls show 78% support the war, while two-thirds favor peace talks, most expecting the fighting to continue at least another year. Yet overall, backing remains firm despite rising costs. As front lines shift and new technology spread, the war endures. Its outcome hinges on battlefield tactics, international resolve, and the staying power of both nations. This conflict is far from over.
Now, next to join our discussion, we are joined from Moscow by Professor Dr. Vincent Ligorio, who is the head of Geopolitical Department at Analytica for Intelligence. Thanks for joining us, Professor. Now, many analysts now call this war a Russian-European war, not just a war between Russia and Ukraine. EU nations are spending $300 billion on defense. We've spent that since 2022, supplying Ukraine with tanks, missiles, and intelligence. It's a point that Sergei Markov was making earlier in our program. Is Russia actually fighting the entire West by proxy?
Well, first of all, good evening and congratulations for this year, of the channel. Well, I think that this proxy war began already in 2014 in a different form, in a different way. But of course, we can say that, yes, definitely this is a proxy war, given the massive of, we say, logistic help and support, but also intelligence and the military support that is given. We know that the structure are present in Ukraine, so let me say, these help overpass the Rubicon, as you would say, in a different age. And we know, and Russia knows, and is making evident that this is mostly a Western Russian conflict, using Ukraine as a proxy rather than, let me say, a brotherhood, as somebody would define conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Now, Russia still exports oil and gas to China and India, but at discounted prices. And of course, gold and foreign reserves are frozen. Technology imports are crippled by sanctions. If this war, and we're taking it from the most recent development, not from 2014, but could it sustain Russia a decade-long war economically if it continues?
Well, no. This was, let me say, a blitzkrieg. We would define that from the Russian perspective, unfortunately, prolonged several years already. We are nearly reaching the fourth year of conflict, and this is not sustainable for different reasons. First of all, Russia is embracing and already embraced a war economy silently, not openly, but the data provide us that this is a war economy. The GDP currently is just growing 0.4 respect on the last year, and two, let me say, sector are growing that are connected with the defense, the oil and gas. That was, let me say, the leading sector, the leading field that was leading the Russian economy, pushing the Russian economy is not anymore the first sector. So I think that the hedge of this war would be the year 5, so it's sustainable for 5 years, according to the analysts, according to the calculation that we made in the very beginning of the conflict. That's why part of the Russian leadership is seeking for an exit strategy that is that will not overlook as a loss for Russia, but as, let me say, a win strategy.
And we've had some worrying escalation in the recent weeks. NATO countries reporting airspace violations, including drone activity over military sites. Can Russia afford this kind of escalation? I think President Trump said it could have been accidental, but I think 3 countries now have been reporting such violations. Is Russia pushing its luck a little bit?
Well, as I say previously on this channel a few days ago, this is just a test. It's not a real escalation. We know that already in the past, since the beginning of this conflict, there were these incidents occurred. Yeah, so the suppressing of the airspace occurred. So and nobody noticed. Let me say from the media. This is a new form, let me say, of media escalation from both sides in order to reach their strategic goal. It would be very difficult to say that Russia would win an escalation because the resources Russia has, they are like strategic weapons that would lead to a nuclear war, and we know that lately, few months ago, the strategy and let me say the narrative was shifted by the Russian leadership. So we have to be very careful when we analyze these and when we talk about these things. So is let me say a very hot issue to say.
Yes, and we're looking at pictures on our screens now of Mark Rutte, who has mentioned a drone wall. NATO, of course, has added 300,000 troops to its eastern flank and built new bases in Romania and Poland. What at first, when this war began, was quite a disunited NATO, quite a disunited Europe. Has this war brought Europe and allies in NATO together?
Well, yes, because if we see in the past, NATO as an alliance was completely dead, and now we have a revamp of this. The newborn NATO with the new member states, with new countries willing to join, and with new resources, let me say, entering into the alliance every day. So this, I think, that was a strategic loss for Russia, because was not expecting, first of all, to bring the war, until today, this length, and of course was, let me say, seeking at, let me say, fragmentation, higher fragmentation of NATO, if not annihilation at all. So this is, let me say, a risk that Russia has taken in the past, and of course didn't oversee what was going on, and we will see for sure in the next month, let me say, a strength in this coalition, a strength, let me say, also on defense strategy and defense policies within the EU. As I say, this drone wall is rather than a political instrument and not a merely defense system, because it would be very complicated to manage it, to control, and to use, of course.
Well, let's come to the United States. Of course, President Putin and President Trump have somewhat of a close relationship, but Trump mentioned, when speaking to his generals just a few days ago, U.S. submarines being moved off the coast of Russia. Might there be a response to this from Moscow?
Well, of course, we will not see Russian submarine over the west coast or the east coast of the United States, but we already seen that Russia is maneuvering a submarine into the Mediterranean Sea. We had few movement in the last weeks, close to Libya, close to Israel. So we know that Russian presence is very active in the Mediterranean Sea. That is also strategic for the United States, because it's part of, let me say, of the NATO zone. So we will see more of these movements rather than crossing the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean from the Russian perspective. But we'll see also other kind of movement, not just a mirroring, but we may see different action from the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation.
And in Russia, President Putin's latest conscription order, how is this going down with the public, and what does it suggest about Russia's manpower needs in the war at this point?
Let me clarify one thing, because always in the Western media and in the global media there is a misunderstanding about this action. There are two, let me say, construction seasons are called in Russia. That is the spring season occurring in April, and the second one, the fall season occurring the 1st of October. These are, let me say, historically occurring is like people going into their mandatory military obligation, and has nothing to do with the current conflict.
Okay.
Of course, now Russia changed let me say, the law. The president signed a few weeks ago a law that all over the year long there will be this military obligation, let me say, recruiting. But we know that people recruiting in this season, on the previous season, or even 1 year ago, they are not forced to go to the front. This is just a military obligation that every Russian citizens in front of the government.
Okay, but not as significant as some might claim. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Professor Dr. Vincent Lagorio from Moscow, head of the geopolitical department at Analytica for Intelligence. Thank you very much for being here on the program. Now, as the Russia-Ukrainian war grinds on, shifting front lines, drone warfare and diplomatic tensions reveal a conflict far from resolution. The stakes remain high for Ukraine, for Russia and for the world. Now, coming up next after our break, Hala El Hamalawi is here with us with some special economic coverage. The US government has entered a partial shutdown, and the Supreme Court is delaying its decision on Fed Governor Lisa Cook until January.